Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel a good number of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, and I would say that this brewery are known mainly for their hazy New England IPAs, and we've had quite a few different sub-styles within that style bracket, but the beer that we're going to try today is a sub-style that we haven't had from them before, and I have to say I'm very curious to see how it turns out. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to go to a little place called Nora once again, which is to the north of Örebro, which is in turn out to the west of Stockholm, and we're going to have a look at yet another beer from Apex Brewing Company. So this must be review number 15 or so that I'm doing from these guys, and this one is called the Carnifex Triple IPA. So Carnifex apparently are an American deathcore band. So a little bit kind of heavy for me. I'm not into the screamy vocals and things like that so much, I have to say. But this particular beer comes in at 10% ABV. As we said, it's a triple IPA and it is in the New England Hazy category. But yeah, this beer was released as part of the Tillfälligt temporary assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden on the 4th of May 2021, along with a few other beers which you'll see featuring on the channel quite soon. And as you can see, we are colour coordinated today, which wasn't intended actually, but that's just how it goes sometimes. But as I say, my first triple IPA from these guys. Hopefully it's another interesting beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one. So let's see how we get on. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Apex Brewing Company before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the fairly near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Apex Brewing Company once again then, on to my brewery notes. So as I've mentioned to you, Apex Brewing Company are based in Nora, to the north of Örebro, out to the west of Stockholm, and this company was founded back in 2017 by Daniel Gatchitz and Niklas Lundgren. So both of these guys are musicians. Niklas played in the band 59 Times the Pain, while Daniel played in the band The Voice of a Generation. And Daniel and Niklas are responsible for the brewing operations, but there are also a few others involved in the company as well, and they take care mainly of the business side of things from what I understand. So these guys are Leif Carlson, Ola Eriksson and Roger Hjelm. But they started off with a 500-litre brew kit and 6 fermentation tanks, and in the early days they were just selling their beers in the local area before they put them into Systembolaget. But in 2018 they brewed around 35,000 litres of beer over the course of the year, and I think that was roughly when I was recommended the single hop IPA, and that was my very first review I did from them. I'm sure that was released in about 2018, and since then this brewery's kind of exploded a little bit, to be honest. So in that year they produced around 25 different varieties, and most of the beers that these guys release, as I said, are hazy New England IPAs. 99% I would say are within that particular style category, but over the course of 2019 they brewed 120,000 litres, and they've probably upscaled that a little bit over the course of 2020, and no doubt they'll do that again over 2021. But as of May 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 70 different kinds of beers, and as I say, about 99% of those are New England Hazy IPAs. I'm sure I did see a lager was released from them quite recently, so hopefully that one is released through Systembolaget at some point as well. Quite often what happens with this brewery is that they'll release their beers a few weeks early through Glassbanken.se and maybe like Kiosk over in Copenhagen and Denmark as well. So yeah, if you want to get their beers like really early, you can go through Glassbanken. It's a great service with a very good selection, but their prices are a wee bit more expensive, and you do get free postage if you order over 1,000 kroners. Worth of stuff actually, but yeah, if you wait a few weeks you can get them through Systembolaget for about half the price, so just be aware of that. It's up to you guys how you want to do it. But yeah, a really well respected brewery here in Sweden these days, doing some very nice hazy New England IPAs, but I do hope in the future that we see some West Coasters and some black IPAs from these guys. So yeah, they've made a name with the hazy, so it's understandable they stick to that, but I would like to see a wee bit more diversity in style from this brewery, I have to say. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Apex Brewing Company for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's crack on then and have a little look at this beer. Very curious. So as you can see, it has the typical Apex Brewing artwork on it. You always get this sort of Illuminati type pyramid thing, and you always get a different animal on these. So this time we have a bat who's had an x-ray, I guess. So a bat skeleton on this one. But yeah, as you can see, the Carnifex Triple IPA. Carnifex, as I said earlier, is a deathcore band from somewhere over in the States. A little bit heavy for me, I have to say. Not so much into deathcore. It's thrash metal and folk metal and stuff like that I like. A bit of power metal as well, I always enjoyed. But yeah, there you can see. This kind of symbol here is the general symbol that you'll get from Apex Brewing Company. So yeah, it's very nicely presented, this one. This beer cost me, I think, 65 Swedish kroners. So that translates roughly to €6.50, just a little bit less than £6 sterling, and probably somewhere in the region of about, not far off, $7.50 American, I would think, maybe nearer $8 actually. But yeah, that gives you a rough kind of price range for that. But if you think in the Swedish context, 65 Swedish kroners for a big triple IPA like this, that is pretty good. That is pretty good going when you consider how high Swedish wages are and things like that. And if I compare that to the sort of prices that I would pay for like an Overtone triple IPA back in Scotland, it is actually maybe a little bit less, I would think. I think you pay about £7 or £8 for an Overtone triple IPA. So yeah, definitely interesting to point out this one. But the profile of this beer, because these guys always put the profile on the Untappd. So this one is hopped with Citra, Mosaic and Galaxy. We know these hops quite well. All four of these are around 14% alpha acid. Citra, Mosaic American, Galaxy is Australian. So Citra is going to give you those lovely kind of mango notes with a good citrusy component to it, a lemon lime usually. But Mosaic is a lovely kind of juicy tangerine element. Sometimes you get a wee bit of pineapple out of it as well. And then Galaxy is a big pungent passion fruit with a little bit of pineapple to it also. But the malt base in this one is Maris Otter Extra Pale, Naked Oats, torrefied wheat, and also some chit malt in there as well. But it uses a WLP 66 London fog yeast, which is actually quite common for these guys. They quite often use that yeast. But for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know before starting this video, chit malt apparently is a German type of malt, and it's a very lightly malted barley that apparently gives a lot of the characteristics of raw barley in a sense. But it's got a lot of protein, and apparently it aids in starch conversion as well. So remember, starch are very, very long sugar chains. Of course, you've got glucose as your base molecule, then you get, you know, some of the bigger sugars that are like two glucoses combined together. Then starch is a very big sugar chain, basically. Remembering my biochemistry, I hated biochemistry at uni. It was just remembering pathways and stuff. Couldn't be arsed with that shit. So that got dropped after second year of my chemistry masters. That was gone. But yeah, starch basically is a very long chain sugar molecule. But yeah, it is apparently as well, the other thing to note about this, as I say, it's a German type of malt, and it is in accordance with the Reinheitsgebot, the German purity law. So yeah, as I said, 10% triple IPA this one, and without further ado, I think we can get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what this has in store for us. So there we go, that is your history section and all your info about the ingredients and stuff. As you know though, I'm a bit of an ingredients nerd, so I always like learning a little bit about this. So I will say something about the triple IPAs a wee bit before we get started on this one, but just before the head of this beer disappears, you can see that this one has poured with just under a half finger of a frothy, I would say cream coloured head on this one, and that is going to fade away quite quickly to be a very thin foamy layer. And you know, this is the thing, the higher up in terms of alcohol content you go, the less likely the head is to hang around. But this beer does have wheat in it. Wheat helps head retention, as you might know, but it's going to leave a lovely kind of foamy ring just around the edge of the glass there. And in terms of colour, if we shine the light through this one is a very kind of rich yellow, but it's leaning towards the paler side of yellow. It looks a little bit brighter and richer on the camera viewfinder than it actually is to the naked eye. But I think it would probably be fair to compare this one to a mango juice. Actually, I think it would be fair to compare to that. It's not quite as pale as you'll get from like a pineapple juice or something like that, but you know, I always like comparing these ones to fruit juices because New England IPAs, that's what their appearance really just reminds me of. But remember, the colour of these beers is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you use, and 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you get a darker colour of beer. I repeat this all the time in the videos. A New England IPA like this one, even if it's a triple IPA, I think you're talking about a 70 to 90 minute boil with these things, but the colour is dependent in the first instance on what types of malt that you use. But the level of haze in this one for a 10%er, you know, it does have a fair wee bit of soupy, gloopy character to it, and you would expect that at 10%, but it's certainly not the soupiest and gloopiest beer that I've come across. I actually had a 5%er from Fierce Beer back in Scotland recently that was just about as hazy as this. And remember, when it comes to the level of haze, that's to do with the oat and the wheat content. The yeast will sometimes play a role in there, but yeah, it just varies from brewery to brewery, and it's all about the ratios that they use within the kind of malt bill, if you like. But yeah, 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of this one, a few little bubbles going up towards the bottom of the glass there, but overall, nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance. So yeah, as I said, I was going to say something about the triple IPAs. For me, I don't really know how I feel about these beers, about triple IPAs. You know, if I'm going to have something that's above 10%, I would probably be more inclined to go for something like a barley wine or an imperial stout. You know, I want something that's got a wee bit more of a kind of malt presence to it if I'm going that high, like yeah, a Scotch ale or something like this. Triple IPAs, I like them every so often, but I kind of think a little bit, you know, do you really need to go above 8% with these beers, especially with the New Englands? I have had some very, very good triple IPAs. Probably one of the best ones that I've ever had would be this one, the Hey Fem from Dry and Bitter Brewing Company in Copenhagen, Gerløse to be precise. So I've had some really, really good triple IPAs that I've been very, very impressed with. But in a lot of cases, in quite a few cases with breweries, I've had double IPAs from them, and then I've had the triple IPA, and I've just kind of thought, you know, do you really need to go that heavy on an IPA? Because to me, an IPA is a little bit more of a kind of sessionable beer, and every so often, yeah, you want one that's a wee bit more boozy, so double IPA. Triple IPAs, you know, I have to just say, I'm not madly inclined to go for them. The reason I went for this one was because I'd never had a triple IPA from Apex Brewing. But if you gave me the choice, after I'd had one, you know, after I would have had one, if you gave me the choice between a triple IPA and a double IPA, personally, I would be more inclined to go with the double IPA. So let me know about your thoughts on this in the comments section below. Because if I was going for a higher alcohol beer, I would just be more inclined to go for something at the darker end of the spectrum than something at the light end of the spectrum. Because I think with some of these beers on the lighter end, they just, you know, they come across as very kind of boozy in a sense, and for me that's a characteristic I prefer to have in darker beers rather than lighter beers. For me, lighter beers should be a little bit more kind of drinkable and things. So let me know what your thoughts are on the triple IPAs in the comment section below. But in a way, I feel what I've said is maybe a little bit hypocritical, because I probably am more of a West Coaster in terms of IPAs than I am a New Englander. I like both, but I do have to admit I like the more kind of caramelly malt bases that you get in the West Coasters. So that's food for thought as well. Maybe I need to think about that. But as I say, let me know your own thoughts in the comments section below. But let's check out the aroma of this beer then and just see how we get on with this one. I think this should be really interesting. So straight away with this one, you get a few of those kind of signature things that you'll always get with Apex. And I've always found these beers just have a little bit of a sort of soft, very slightly farmhousey and kind of crackery thing about them. I've always found this is a kind of signature, I think, of the Apex Brewing Company aroma, if you like. You'll find this in pretty much all of their beers. It doesn't often translate into the aroma, into the flavour right enough. You know, they come across as more kind of what you'd expect, you know, a big creamy sort of thing in the flavour, but you always get this sort of Jacob's cream cracker base out of the aroma with these Apex beers, and I do enjoy that. So the backbone of this beer is a sort of Jacob's cream cracker kind of thing. You get that there, but then on top of that, you definitely get a sort of softer white bready character in there as well. You can smell a few sort of farmhousey elements to it, just a little touch grainy actually. So maybe that's the chip malt. You do get a wee bit more of a kind of chip malt in this one, and I would say also you do get a wee bit of this with the soft bread. You do get almost a little bit of like a kind of flour. If you think about being in the bakery and smelling the flour and things, you do get a wee bit of that kind of vibe out of the aroma with this beer. And if you take the aroma in a little bit more deeply, you can definitely pick up a wee bit of the smoothness of the you can absolutely pick up a little bit of the smoothness of the oaty character in this one, and at the back of the nose you get a lot of wheat out of this. So yeah, the torrefied wheat in this one coming out very, very nicely. But it's not, the wheat in this beer for me isn't overly bitey. And I think, you know, I've said this before, I'm curious to see how this one comes out, because this one doesn't really have a sweeter malt in it. And I've always felt that when you go above the 8% mark in a triple IPA, you do need something like a little bit of Cara Pils or a Cara Munich, or, you know, something like this that just gives you a wee touch of sweetness to cover up the booziness in the New England IPAs. So I'm curious to see how this one translates, because this one seems to have a more kind of bready sort of malt base. It's a kind of, I hesitate to say plain because it's not, but the Maris Otter often gives you just a little touch of biscuitiness, but I think you need something that's got a wee bit of a more potent brown sugar to it in a New England IPA when you go above that 8% mark. Otherwise the beer can just feel quite boozy, but you know, alcohol flavours inherently have a little bit of brown sugar to them. And in fairness with this one, you can pick up just a little hint of brown sugar, but the beer overall would be, it really comes across as very soft, and it's almost like a wet white bread that you get out of this one. The aroma in the middle of your nose smells very wet, like a wet white bread. Sorry, I think I said brown bread a second ago, but it really comes across as a wet white bread that you get with this one. There's a few bread crusty elements in there, like I said, a bit of graininess, a bit of wheaty bitiness at the back of the nose, and I think it works out really nicely. So yeah, the aroma of this one is quite interesting, and I think some of the grainy notes and some of that wet white bread, that could well be the chip malt in this one. But let's move on to the hoppy side of things with this beer then. So, on the hoppy side of this beer, you get a nice kind of, you get a little bit of a kind of earthy component out of this one. That's the mosaic that's going to give you that, I would think. But there's a huge green component to this beer. It's got a big, bright floral aromaticity. As we said, you've got an Australian and 2 American hops in here that are 14% alpha acid roughly. That just makes sense. So you've got a big, bright floral aromatic quality out of this one. I wouldn't describe it as being spicy, but you've got a good little bit of a kind of grassy, zesty quality to this beer as well. So I do really like how that goes together. You do get a nice bit of green in this one that's pairing up well with the slight wheaty bitiness that this beer has at the back of the notes. But other than that, I don't think there's too much to report on the green side of things. That is kind of to be expected. But on the fruity side of the beer, it has, you know, if you know these hops, it is giving you what you would expect as well. So for me, there's a good little bit of a passion fruity pungency to this one. Absolutely, good little bit of passion fruit for me. You got a lovely juicy mango-y element, which will be the citra. The passion fruit will be coming both from the Galaxy and the citra in this one. There's a softer wee touch of apricot in there, which I think is more likely to be citra. You can smell the bright pineapple in this one as well. And then you get the tropical fruits for me are quite pungent, but then, you know, if you take it in initially, you're going to get the tropical notes and their pungency, but then as the aroma kind of mellows out, you start to get the kind of more juicy and oily tangerine orangey note from the mosaic in this one. So I like how that goes together. It does become a little bit more orangey and pineapple-y the more that you smell of it. Remember as well that New England IPAs do rely more on late edition hops than early edition hops compared to the West Coasters, and if you add hops early in the wort boil, that's when you get most bitterness, but you've got a gradual trade-off over the course of the wort boil from bitterness to flavour and aroma. So just remember that with these beers. But it's a lovely smelling beer, this one. It's got the signature sort of crackery thing you'd expect from Apex, and the wet bread thing I think makes this one a bit unique compared to their other beers, and I suspect that that is the chip malt that's in here. So yeah, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma, but I think it's about time that we taste this one. So yeah, this one is the Carnifex Triple IPA, coming in at 10% ABV, a New England hazy triple IPA, quite obviously, from Apex Brewing Company in Nora, just to the north of Örebro here in Sweden. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, and cheers. Now, that's quite interesting. Now, when I gave you that sort of speech earlier on about how, you know, triple IPAs tend to need a little bit more of a kind of brown sugary malt in them to just kind of round them off, it's typical when you say something like this and then you get a beer that just kind of proves to you that maybe you don't. So this one, I was a wee bit concerned with this one that it might just feel a little bit boozy, but that beer feels pretty much as smooth and as drinkable as some of the double IPAs that these guys do. Maybe even not quite as maybe even not as boozy as some of the double IPAs that they do. So that's an interesting point. And I will say straight away, for a triple IPA, that beer is stupidly drinkable. It comes across, the main difference I would say is that, you know, the double IPAs come across as quite soft in a sense, whereas this beer actually, the other ones come across as like soft and more farmhousey, whereas this beer comes across as a little bit more oily and kind of creamy in its mouthfeel. That's my first impression of this one. But you know, if you're at 10% alcohol, makes sense. You know, you're going to have a bigger malt base, if you like. So yeah, this is really interesting for sure. I like how that. I think this one, I do like how that goes together. I do like a little bit of oiliness in my New England IPAs for sure. So yeah, this one will be getting sipped over the next hour or two while I'm watching the Scottish election results. So yeah, I like how it goes together. There we go, lined up again. OCD is happy. But yeah, initial impressions, positive. So let's try and break down the flavour a little bit more for you then. Putting the last of it in there as well. It does even feel a bit thicker now. But yeah, this is good, definitely. So yeah, for me, it's straight away with this beer, you can feel it takes a little while to come out actually, but you know, the backbone of this beer again is that sort of crackery thing, that Jacob's cream crackery thing, and the slight graininess. That is the signature of Apex. As I say, they've always got this Jacob's cream crackery, slightly grainy malt base, so that just forms the backbone of this beer. That's the base on the middle third of your palate, absolutely. On top of that, you can feel a soft white bready quality in there. The bread at the same time though, it does have a wee bit of a grainy edge to it, which I suspect would be the chip malt. You do get a bit more of a kind of bread crusty vibe within that bready layer that the beer has, absolutely, and it does, you know, the bread in this one does feel a little bit wetter in a sense, and you pick that up in the aroma. This chip malt is quite interesting. I need to see if there's a few lagers or something in Germany through Biothek in Bamberg, if I can get a hold of some of those. But yeah, the malty side of this beer is quite different compared to some of the other ones that we've had before, but I think this kind of slightly grainy, soft bready note actually suits the crackery base, the signature Apex crackery base, quite well as well. On top of that, you do get a wee bit of the kind of smoother oaty elements, but I don't find the oats as prominent in this Apex one compared to some of the other ones that we've had before. But this is the thing with Apex, they produce so many New Englands that they're going to play around with the ratios and stuff quite a bit actually. So this one is quite a bit different to the other Systembolaget releases that they've done before. So bear that in mind. And I think we're getting this beer just in really nice condition as well actually. That's one of the things with New England IPAs. If you drink them too soon, they just come across as really green. I think these beers need at least 2 weeks in the can actually, just to let the dry hopping and stuff mellow out properly. But this one's in really good condition just now. But yeah, as I say, in the middle of your palate, on top of that malt, you can feel there's like a sort of smoother oaty layer to this one, but it's not madly thick. So I think the bready notes that you're getting out of this one, it's probably the Maris Otter Extra Pale and the oats that are giving you that, along with the chit. So you've got a wee bit of that kind of in there. As I say, the oats just kind of sit on top. But in the very middle of your palate, you do get a wee touch of a very slight Werther's Original kind of butter candy thing. This beer really does not feel as if it has such a kind of brown sugary element to it, and in the way that gives you it almost gives you the impression that there's not a lot of booze in this one, and that's one of the reasons why this beer really seems extremely drinkable. It does say this is stupidly drinkable for a 10% New Englander. It's kind of mad actually, but yeah, it's surprising how well you can kind of cover that up actually. So that is impressive. I have to give Apex the impression for that. And again, this is one of the things, if you're having a triple IPA, you know, maybe you want it to show you a little bit of booziness, whereas this one doesn't really show its booziness at all. So again, let me know your thought about that in the comments section below. But yeah, I think that covers the middle third of your palate. To be honest, well, the only other thing I would add is that if you go to the front corners of your palate and go diagonally back, you will get a little undertone of woodiness on the front half of that middle third of your tongue, if you like. But yeah, border region between middle third and back third of your tongue, you get a little bit of a slightly more doughy bready quality there and some bread crusty elements, so it feels a little bit thicker on the border region. Then when you go onto the back third of your tongue, you've got a lovely bit of wheaty quality there. I don't find the wheat in this beer overly bitey, in honesty. Yeah, it's got a wee touch of bitiness there, and it lingers for the first bit, but it really, the back third of your palate really smoothens out quite nicely. But as you always get with these beers, on the back third of your palate, sitting on top of that, you have a nice, you do have a nice little bit more of a kind of yeasty character coming out of this one. So you can feel a few of the lighter, kind of more airy, yeasty elements coming out of this one. So when you start at the back of your palate, the flavour sort of comes up like this, and then it just condenses down, and as you move into that middle third of your palate, it goes down quite a bit and moves into the centre of your palate there. So it looks, it does come across really nicely in the malt base there. So that's quite an interesting one. Smooth wheat and a little bit of a kind of nice airy yeasty quality to it. But yeah, stupidly drinkable for a 10%er. Crazy. But yeah, let's focus on the hoppy side of things then. Back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little touch of earthiness there. That'll be courtesy of Mosaic, I would think. As you move further forward from that, it mellows out a wee bit. But then the earthiness, I think, in this beer actually does take a wee bit of time to kind of disappear. But progressively, as you move further and further forward, it gets a little bit more floral and aromatic. And I wouldn't describe it as spicy, but it's a nice big deep floral aromaticity that you get out of this one. But around the front curve of the palate, the beer is distinctly lighter and grassy, I would say. The green component in this one isn't too big compared to some other you know, triple New England triples that I've had, but it's definitely there, as I would say, just not as prominent as I've had in some others. But yeah, let's focus on the fruity side of the beer then, the front third of your palate. So border region again between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of a bready build up, a wee bit of a kind of bread crusty element in there, and then the base of that front third of your palate is a little bit more kind of smooth and white bready, if you like. So yeah, you can feel that sort of white bready there, but you do get a wee bit of that graininess, which, as I say, I suspect is from the kind of chip malt in this one. And on top of that, of course, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So at the back of that front third of your tongue, you've got a wee bit more of you do get a wee bit of that pungent passion fruity note, which is both Citra and Galaxy. Both of those are going to give you that. As you move further forward, you start to get a wee touch of a kind of oily mango in there, which is more likely to be the Citra. And then as you reach the kind of midpoint of that front third of your palate, you can feel a wee bit of apricot underneath, and there's a bit of a kind of juicy pineapple sitting on top of that. The pineapple is more likely to be from the Galaxy, and the apricot, I think, is more from the Citra, but when you move into the front third of your palate, the front half of that front third of your palate, sorry, that's when you get the more oily tangerine note from the Mosaic in there, absolutely. And then the pineapple from the Galaxy sort of creeps over into that front half as well and just sits on top of the tangerine notes. If you go right towards the kind of front tip of your tongue, just behind the grassy esters, I think you get a wee touch of a slightly lemon limey sort of thing, and that's the Citra that's going to contribute that, I would say, out of all three of the hops. But yeah, all three of these hops are kind of showing themselves off quite nicely. But Galaxy, Citra and Mosaic, this is quite a common combination. I'm sure I've had this in a good few beers before, but it works, and that's obviously why they would choose it for this one. I think the highlight of this beer, in honesty, is probably the chip malt, because it is something just a wee bit different. I get the impression that's kind of what they've been going for here, as well as the fact that it's, you know, a triple IPA. So yeah, the fruity side of this beer is nice and soft and juicy, so I can appreciate how this one goes about its business. Absolutely, I like that about this beer for sure. So thumbs up to Apex Brewing in this one for doing something just a wee bit different. But for a 10% New England IPA, the drinkability of this one is just stupid. It's crazy. But yeah, as I say, thumbs up to them for that. So I think we can round off the review now with the mouthfeel then. So what are we going to say about that? I mean, for me, this beer, it's hard to place. I mean, it almost feels in some ways that it's right in the middle of the spectrum. I really don't find this beer madly thick at all. So it's right in the middle of the mid-bodied component, maybe pushing towards the top end of mid-bodied in a sense. It's got a wee bit of the creaminess you expect of a New England IPA, but I find this one, it's got a degree of oiliness to it and a bit of slickness. Absolutely. It's definitely not the thickest New England triple that I've come across at all, and that's what surprises me about this one. So yeah, this is a really interesting beer in terms of mouthfeel. That's one of the other highlights of it. But in terms of hoppy bitterness, this beer, I think it's a fairly standard 25 or 30 IBU beer. Normally with triple IPAs, they do make them a little bit bitter. There's a kind of rule, I think, almost an unwritten rule, where, you know, a New England IPA should be about 30, you know, a New England double should be about 40, and then a triple IPA should be about 50 IBUs. Usually the bitterness goes up to cover up the booziness. But as we said, with the malt base in this beer, it's crackery, it's grainy, and then it's got a smoothness on top of it. This one doesn't have a big sweet component, which is unusual for a triple, actually. And again, it's unusual because usually alcohol has this inherent slightly brown sugary quality to it in terms of flavour. So this beer is making me think about a lot of different things, and that's probably why I've enjoyed this review as much as I have, I would say. So I like beers that make me think, and these are always the ones that turn into the longer reviews. So yeah, the malt base in this beer for me is really interesting, and the malt base has quite an impact on the mouthfeel, absolutely. But the hoppy side of this beer, as I say, I would be surprised if this is any more than 25 or 30 IBUs, which is interesting for sure. But yeah, the fruity side of this beer is quite nice and juicy and light in a sense. I wouldn't describe this beer as being overly oily in terms of the fruitiness. But yeah, I think we can leave the review at that. This is a really interesting beer for me. It's made me think about quite a few different things, and I'd say the drinkability of this is stupid. It's just crazy for a 10%er, and the chip malt, pardon me, it really adds a few interesting aspects to this one too. But yeah, let's leave it at that for this review. This one was the Carnifex Triple New England IPA at 10% ABV from Apex Brewing Company in Nora near Örebro in Sweden. Really interesting beer this, and I've certainly enjoyed this review, so I hope that you guys have enjoyed my take on this one as well. So yeah, let's leave it there. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know those things I was talking about with triple IPAs as well. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But this beer has been a really interesting one to review. If you get the chance to try some of these Apex beers, you will enjoy them if you're a fan of the New England Hazies. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Apex Brewing Company, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.